Hey guys, it's me, Dr. Harvey. If you don't recognize me by now, then you haven't been paying attention. But anyhow, so we're talking today about affiliation and friendship. So affiliation is our connectedness with other people. And specifically, we'll talk about friendship type of relationships, but a lot of this also applies to love relationships. But we will have a whole nother chapter on love relationships specifically because there are certainly differences between friendships and love relationships. All right, so what is the goal of affiliation? Why do we even want to have friends? Well, we like those who make us feel good, and that is one theory of why we have friendships. This is called the reinforcement affect model. Affect means emotions, so your emotions are being reinforced by being with or around the other person. So this theory is that we like people with whom we associate positive feelings, and we dislike people with whom we associate negative feelings. Now, in this chapter, the different things you could take from it is how do you make friends? Why do people have certain friends? How could you use affiliation and friendship to your advantage, perhaps in salesmanship, if you become a cult leader? You could also see how you could be taken advantage of by people who understand how friendships are made and use those principles. So if you want to get somebody to like you, then you do positive things around them. You create a positive association. And interestingly, we'll see as a therapist, you often see in relationships where two people and a couple are having problems, and every interaction is a negative emotion, and then they don't understand why they're having so many problems. Well, if you ignored the problems and you said, my goal is to create nothing but positive interactions, then that would improve the relationship. Now, negative interactions are important. As a matter of fact, research has shown that you should have 5 positive to every 1 negative interaction. And if you have less than that, so like 10 positive to every 1 negative interaction, then that can cause problems because you do need to talk about personal issues. So that also works in friendships, but we'll just stick to friendships for now. Okay, so the reinforcement affect model. Now, this is a domain general model, and a domain general model means that it's a type of model that tries to explain everything by like one rule, like Nike's just do it. Or in this case, the reinforcement effect model, we do something because we feel good. Now that doesn't explain everything. That doesn't explain why you're in a domestic violence relationship. It doesn't explain why sometimes you have crappy friends who don't make you feel good. But it does explain a lot of friendship. Versus a domain-specific model, which presumes that the reasons or the governing principles of behavior change from situation to situation. So a friendship is different than a romance, is different than business partners, and there's different types of friendships, so there may be different rules governing those. The pros and cons are a domain-specific model is much more accurate in its explanation. However, a domain general model is more generalizable, it's easier to apply. But you can lose accuracy with that, and they both have their places. So another theory of why we like certain people, why we have friendships, is the social exchange theory. So the social exchange theory says that we trade pros and cons, benefits and costs in a relationship. Basically, it's saying that you get something out of a relationship and you also put things into a relationship. And we want to have a good exchange of how much we put in versus how much we get out. And equity is the concept of when you are getting out as much as you put into the relationship. And so social exchange theorists, at least originally, believed that equity was the goal of a relationship, and that if there was an imbalance in what you put in and what you got out, then that would cause problems in the relationship. Now, there's actually, I'm going to skip through here, because there's actually research that contradicts that. Yeah, so, okay, so basically, if I wrote this chapter, I would reorganize this stuff, but People have a communal orientation or a community orientation. How much do you believe that it's okay to put into a relationship of some sort versus how much you get out? And there's these 4 fundamental patterns of social exchange. So communal sharing, authority ranking, equality matching, and market pricing. And we see these same dynamics happening in economies as what you would have in a relationship, whether it's a friendship or a love relationship, or even business relationships. So communal sharing is a form of exchange in which members of a group share a pool of resources, taking when they are in need and giving when others are in need. So communal sharing is like communism, or at least how communism is supposed to work. It usually doesn't end up this way, but everybody puts into a pot and then you take when you need it. So no matter how hard you work, you only take what you need, so that other people, even if they're not able to work as hard as you or able to produce as much, they'll still get what they need in order to survive, which is why communism sounds wonderful. But usually communism, not usually, every time, communism fails and turns into authority ranking, where there's certain elite people who rise to the top. And so authority ranking is a form of exchange in which goods are divided according to a person's status in the group. So if you are high ranking, you get more simply because of your status in the group. Okay? And you can see this in relationships when maybe you have a stay-at-home wife and a husband that works, and in some dysfunctional relationships, the husband will deny the wife money and funds because it's his money. He's the one that's working. She's just staying home, so she's lower status, and so he controls it and he denies her a lot of stuff. Although she's saving him a whole bunch of money in daycare and things like that. But anyhow, we won't get into that too much. Then we have equality matching, which is basically what equity is. So I want to get out of this relationship as much as I put in. So if I'm working hard on this relationship, then I better get a lot out of it. And so basically, there's equality. We get the same amount. And even if I am getting as much out of it as I put in, if you're not putting the same amount in and getting the same amount out, then we're unhappy. So it's a form of exchange in which each person gets the same as the others. Versus market pricing, which is like capitalism, I get out what I put in. So it's a form of exchange in which everyone gets out in proportion for what they put in. Okay. Now, when it comes to your willingness to share, to put in to a relationship versus your expectations of getting something out of it, it's actually a personality thing. So we know that there are certain people who are low in communal orientation and certain people who are high in communal orientation. So people who are low in communal orientation are more likely to believe in this sort of capitalistic type of relationship. I should get out of it what I put into it. And people who are high in communal sharing or in communality, in communal orientation, are more likely to like this type of communal sharing. I'll put into it as much as I can, and then I'll get out of it what I need. And even if you're not putting in as much as me, that's okay. So people who are low in communal orientation are more likely to be market value people. I should get into it, or I should get out of it what I put into it. And they feel best when they're treated equitably, and they're unhappy when they're getting either too much or too little. Okay? So we can see with this chart, the pink is the low communal orientation that we were just talking about, the capitalistic type of people. And they're happiest in an equitable relationship. We're both working hard and we're both getting stuff out of it. And they're very unhappy, unsurprisingly, when they are working harder than what they get out of it. So they're working harder than the other person to make the relationship work. But they're also unhappy when they're getting more out of it than the other person. They don't want that. They want things to be equal. And so they don't want to over-benefit from the relationship, and they also don't want to under-benefit from the relationship. High communal people aren't particularly troubled if there's a discrepancy between what they're getting, or what they're giving, and what they're getting out of a relationship. So if they put in more than what they're getting, okay. If they're getting more than what they put in, Okay, so we see that they are happiest when they're over-benefited, which I think doesn't say much for them, but maybe that's because I'm a low communal orientation person. So they're happiest when they get more out of a relationship than what they're putting into it. They're second most happy when things are equal, but not nearly as happy as when they're over-benefited. And then they're the least happy when they are under-benefited. So they really don't like it when they work harder than the other person and they're getting less out of it than the other person. Okay, and we see the same thing in economies with socialism and communism and stuff, where people who are pro-socialism or pro-communism are often very happy when they're over-benefited. Equal is okay, but the whole purpose of socialism and communism is to get stuff, so they want to be getting stuff. But anyhow, you can see that the happiest person in a relationship is a low communal orientation person, so a capitalistic type of person in an equal relationship. If it's not equal, they're very unhappy. And you can really understand why people believe in certain economies if you can understand that certain people are probably born, perhaps it's a genetic component to personality of their communal orientation. It could also be how they're raised. I don't really know. I don't think there's a lot of research done on that. But anyhow, let's go back. Okay, so social exchange theory, reinforcement affect model. All right, let's talk about getting social support. When do we reach out to friends and how does that happen? So we are most likely to reach out to another person when we're emotionally distressed. And this may be a genetically programmed, and I don't think it's maybe, I think it is a genetically programmed basic component of being human. We do better in numbers, we do better in social situations, and the more stressed we are, the more we need those people around us. So social support includes the emotional, being able to talk to your friends and vent, but it also includes the material, when your parents give you some money or whatever, and informational assistance. So let's say you have a baby who's colicky and you call your mom up or a friend and say, what do I do in this situation? That's informational. Material support also includes instrumental support, which is actually physically doing something to help another person, like going and changing their tire for them. Now, health psychology is a field of psychology where we study how the psychology and the physiology interact. It's also called psychoneuroimmunology. Psychology, neurology, immunology, or the immune system. So we know that people with a good social support system do better in life physically. They're less likely to get cancer. They're less likely to use drugs and alcohol. They're more likely to live longer. They're less likely to even catch a cold if they have a good social support. Now, social support does not necessarily mean the quantity of your friendships. So extroverts usually have lots of friends, but they're usually lower quality relationships, whereas introverts will have fewer friends, but they're higher quality relationships. But what really defines a social support network is what is the diversity of your friendships. If you have 1,000,000 friends and all of them are exactly the same, they're clones of each other, then you still don't have a good social support network. So it's diversity. If you're Republican, you should have a Democratic friend. If you're Christian, you should have a Muslim friend. I mean, you should have diversity within your friendships. And that makes sense because there's many different situations in which we need this social support, and one person or one type of person can't help you with all of these vast things that could happen. So you need a friend who can help you with parenting, or maybe that's your mother or father or something. You need somebody who can help you when the car breaks down. You need someone you can call up when you're having computer issues. So the more diversity within that friendship circle, the healthier you are, the better off you are. Now, when we are in a social relationship, and especially when there's stress, because social support and the need for social support and stress are very tightly linked, how do we behave when we're stressed out? Men are more likely to do fight or flight. Women are more likely to do something that's called tend and befriend. Now, these are generalities, and there are certainly situations where men do tend and befriend and where women do fight and flight. But just statistically speaking, women are less likely than men to fight or to run away in a stressful situation. So tend and befriend is this concept where you care for, that's tending, and it's not necessarily just the offspring, that's just an example. You could be tending for family, friends, whatever, and then you befriend, you pull closer, and not just to other females, but to whatever the situation is. It's kind of like the concept, if you can't beat them, join them. And so you often see this in situations of intense stress. Like, for instance, I think it was back in the 70s, there was a woman, an heiress, named Patty Hearst, and she was the heiress of, you've probably heard of Hearst Castle up farther north in California. And so she's a very rich girl, and she was kidnapped by the, what was it called? Something Liberation Army. Can't remember. Some like minor terrorist group. And she's kidnapped, and then all of a sudden the next thing you see is she's robbing a bank with them. She's carrying her own machine gun, and she's totally participating in what they're doing. And so everybody's like, was she in on it from the first place, or what happened? And probably what happened was because she was abused. I've heard that she was raped, that because she couldn't fight and she couldn't get away, she couldn't flee, she did tend and befriend instead. So if I become friends with them, and this is a very unconscious thing usually, if I become friends with them, if I take their side, then I'm more likely to survive because I can't fight them, I can't get away, but I could become their friends. And this is also what happens with Stockholm Syndrome. That is an example of Stockholm Syndrome. Okay? And you can see this also, like if you've ever seen horse training done, or you've done horse training, one of the things that you do with a horse is you put them in a round pen, a circular pen, and basically you chase them. And it doesn't take very long for them to learn that they can't get away from you. And most horses won't fight you. Occasionally, maybe a Mustang or something will fight. But assuming they don't win, they start thinking of other options, and they think, maybe I can tend and befriend. Maybe I can become a friend of this predator since I can't run away and I can't fight it. And you'll see them actually start making friendship signals towards the person that's chasing them, and eventually they'll become very closely connected to that person. And basically you're giving the horse Stockholm Syndrome. It's a terrible way of putting it, but it creates a partnership with the horse, and it's very effective. Okay, so women tend and befriend. And just one more thing that I want you to get out of this. Another time when you see this is in a rape situation or molestation situation, and a lot of women will just beat themselves up because they don't understand why. They just took it. They just laid there and let it happen, and they didn't fight. You know, you'll hear women say, I should have fought, why didn't I scream or anything? I didn't cry out for help. And it's because their brain makes the decision, can you successfully fight off this predator in this situation? Can you get away? And because women are generally physically weaker, there's many situations in which your brain knows that your survival chances are very small if you try to actually fight off this man. And so instead, your brain might say the best survival mechanism right now is tend and befriend. And so there have been cases where a woman was raped, and then after she was raped, she got up and she cooked him a meal. And she's like, I don't understand why. I actually saw an interview of this woman, and she's like, I don't know why I did it. It was just like this reaction, and I cooked him a meal after he just raped me, beat me up and raped me. But it makes total sense when we know that tend and befriend is a reaction of the brain, just like fight or flight is. In another situation, a woman was raped, and then the guy starts driving her out into the middle of nowhere to kill her, and he had raped and murdered multiple women before her. And she decided that the only way she could survive this situation was if she made him her friend, made him like her. And so on the drive out, she said it was like an hour drive, and she just talked to him and joked and laughed and told him what a great guy he was. And then at some point he said, you know what, I'm going to take you back to town and drop you off because you're so great and I was so happy to meet you. And she survived because she was willing to do tend and befriend. So if you've ever been in a situation like that, or you ever hear of something like that happening, just realize that this is a normal psychological reaction that happens in a stressful situation. Let's talk about the threats that cause us to reach out to other people and to reach for social support. So two of the biggest things that research has shown causes people to desire to be around others is danger and the fear of death. So we have a tendency to affiliate under threat. And again, like I said before, this is because we're safer in numbers. We have more of a survival chance if there's people around us. And so we have a reflexive reaction to reach out to others and to be in a social support network when we have this threatening situation. One of the experiments that was done was they had people come in and they had them think about their own death. And I believe they had to write a little essay about it. And then they sent them into a waiting room and they looked to see where did they decide to sit. Now, normally when you go into a sitting room, you want to try to stay as far away from the people around you as you can. And so if it's really crowded, you might just have one seat between you and the person next to you, and everybody else tries to keep one seat. And we hate when there's no seats and you have to sit next to a stranger. But after these people thought about death, they went and they sat near people. And so there would be clumps of people. And that's because, again, when we are under a threat of some sort, we need a social support. Our mind is programmed to reach out to other people, to be around people. Another experiment that was done was they had, I believe it was just done on women, so they had women who were research participants and they were told that this experiment was going to cause physical pain. It was going to be painful. And when they were told that there would be pain, they looked at each other much more often than women who were not told that there would be pain in the experiment. So they were constantly glancing at each other for social support. Okay, so danger, threats, death, whatever that is threatening to us causes us to want other people. We don't want to be socially isolated. People generally respond to social exclusion by working hard to enhance their social bonds, showing more interest in making new friends, volunteering to work with others, saying nice things about other people. So when we're socially isolated, when we're socially excluded, we want to reach out to other people. And these are some examples of how that happens. And we also know that social exclusion has so many bad side effects. So school shooters are always socially excluded children. They don't fit in, they don't have any or very many friends. Usually if they have a friend group, then it's one or two other people, and everybody else has rejected them. And so it's really important, like if you're a parent and your child isn't good at making friends, you need to work so hard to help them to develop those social skills, because the long-term results of being socially isolated are so negative. I mean, obesity, depression, loneliness, violence. We know people who are socially excluded are much more aggressive. So social isolation is bad for humans, very bad for humans. Now, extroverts do worse with social isolation than introverts, but even introverts have their friendships. Now, why do some people push these friendships away? Why do they push away social support? There's two big reasons. One is that support can't be reciprocated. So when somebody's doing something for you and you can't do anything to give back to them, it can be very uncomfortable. And you often see this like if somebody has a chronic illness and they're just so exhausted all the time and everybody's constantly doing things to help them, it can just become a burden for them to be helped, even though they need it. And so they'll push people away because they can't reciprocate. Then fear of embarrassment is another one. So an example of this is somebody's in a cult and their family's reaching out and saying, we want to help you, this is not good for you, please let us help you. But they push that support away. One of the reasons why they do it is because they're embarrassed. Because if they admit that they need help, then now they've admitted they've made a huge mistake, maybe a mistake that has been directing their lives for years or even decades, and that's horrifyingly embarrassing to people. And so it can be very hard to overcome that. Now, when you push away social support, of course, that leads to loneliness. You're socially isolated. Loneliness and depression are very tightly interlinked. And when you are lonely, when you're depressed, you tend to behave in ways that drive away people. It's uncomfortable to be around you. People who are depressed are often irritable. They're often grouchy and it's a negative association. And as we know with friendship and affiliation, we like to be around people who bring us positive emotions. And so the negativity that comes when people are lonely and depressed can drive away the very people that they need. So there is a self-perpetuating cycle of loneliness. You're depressed. I mean, it could start either one. You could start as lonely, you could start as depressed. But if you're depressed, then usually there's negative interpersonal behaviors, such as constantly talking about unpleasant things. Other people begin to avoid you. You become lonely. When you're lonely, you have discomfort around others. And you often see this with introverts who They feel awkward, socially awkward around people. This may also be being triggered by the depression in the first place, that they have a hard time interacting and being the cheerful, positive self that people like. And then they start to avoid others, and they also behave in ways that are unappealing, just like kind of this negative interpersonal behavior. And then self-defeating thoughts are a big part of depression and loneliness. I have no friends because I'm an unlikable person. Nobody likes me because, everybody else is jerked or whatever. So they have these negative thoughts, self-defeating thoughts, which leads to depression. Depression leads to more loneliness. Loneliness leads to more depression. So you have this self-perpetuating cycle. And one of the ways that we treat depression is simply by getting people out. Just go do something. Even if you're depressed, just go to the beach, go to church, talk to someone. Even if you don't like them, just talk to someone. And so it can start to break up this pattern. Now, of course, it depends on what's causing the depression. If you have some sort of medical condition that's causing depression, doesn't matter how many people you interact with or how many times you go sit on the beach, it's not going to alleviate the depression. But if depression is caused by this type of social situation, then it's a very effective treatment for it. So strong attachments to others can lead to a positive cycle in our interactions with other people. So if we are socially isolated, then that starts this cycle into becoming more socially isolated. But if we are more socially active, then it will start to build up to a more positive group of social support. And so that's one of the reasons why we tell people just get out there. Even if all you do is talk to one person and nothing comes of it, just get out there, because that will start creating this energized cycle of social interaction. Now, another thing that's important is your attachment to your parents. So if you remember John Bowlby from Psych 101, he said that there's secure attachments and insecure attachments. If you have a secure attachment to your parent or to whoever was your caregiver, then you are better at handling stress later in life. You're better at making friendships. In college students, they find that securely attached students have a better mood and get better grades. So it's not a cure-all, but it is certainly a very important factor for raising well-developed children. And really, we talk about, we want our children to be happy. We want our children to be happy. That's a terrible goal, because most of the time in life you're not happy. What you want your children to be is well-developed human beings. And then they can try to create their own happiness rather than you forcing happiness down their throat. And so make sure that you have a secure relationship with your child. And I will say point out one thing with your child and developing friendships and stuff. Research has shown the more time your kid spends outside in nature, the better they are able to deal with life. The happier they are, the less depression, less drug use, less jail time. There's so many positive benefits to being outside. And it's not just outside, but it's outside unsupervised, which I know totally freaks people out in today's culture. We're so phobic that this tiny chance that something might happen to your child. So yes, something could happen. Yes, your kid could be kidnapped, even though the statistics are so incredibly low with child kidnapping. 100 kids get kidnapped by strangers a year in the United States. 100. And of those, I believe only 3 don't make it back alive. So 3 children out of how many millions of children we have in the United States. But the research shows if your child doesn't get out in nature, unsupervised out in nature, that their rate of suicide skyrockets, their rate of anxiety and depression skyrockets, obesity leading to diabetes and heart attacks skyrockets. You're cursing your child to a terrible life by not letting them just go out and play. Take a break, read a book, watch TV, and kick your kid out of the house and let them go play. Everybody will be so much better off. And it also helps them to handle stress later in life, which is very important for avoiding depression. We know that kids who are protected from stress, who are sheltered, their neurological system doesn't develop as adults to be able to handle stress. So they're much more likely to have anxiety, panic attacks, depression, and so on. So you want your kids to have an age-appropriate amount of stress in their lives. So letting your kids go off by themselves and dealing with life is one way where you can expose them fairly safely to stresses. So when I was a kid, for instance, my sisters and I were going through one of those culverts, the big pipes that they allow water through if there's like a flash flood, and there was a beehive in it. And we disturbed it, and we had to run screaming from all these bees. Nobody got stung or anything, it was fine. But it's like one of our best childhood stories. That's the stress that your child can deal with that will lead to a better capability as an adult to deal with stressful situations. You don't want to over-shelter your child, or you're just going to make their life miserable. All right, so social comparison. Social comparison is a double-edged sword. It's got its good points and its bad points. If you can compare yourself to someone who is on par, equal level to you, or below, then you'll feel better feel better about yourself. However, if you're comparing yourself to somebody who is above you, then that can often make us feel bad. Now, there's a lot of factors that go into that. Sometimes we can kind of bask in the glory of the other person, which is why people like to be friends with celebrities, because they kind of have some reflected light from their shining star or whatever. But in general, I'd say comparing yourself to people who have a better life than you, or at least you perceive as a better life, will decrease our self-esteem, increase depression. So we like to compare ourselves to others because we want to evaluate ourselves, our opinions, our abilities, get information. But we prefer to compare ourselves to people who are similar. Because really, if they're super dissimilar to you, then is it an accurate comparison? So it makes sense that we want to compare ourselves to other similar people, whether that's race, religion, politics, whatever. And what similarities we're interested in is individual to the person. It's what's important to you. So if you couldn't care less about politics, then it doesn't matter whether the person is the same political orientation as you or not. That's not even going to be a factor in social comparison. However, if you're a hardcore Democrat and this other person is a Republican, then you don't want to compare yourself to a Republican, because that's something that's important to you, and you don't feel like that's the same type of person as you, so social comparison isn't really valid. All right. Also, I think there was something else on. Yeah. Okay. This chapter is just, I don't like the order of this chapter, so I'll just skip around a little bit. So when an issue is highly important to us, and it's something we value, we prefer affiliating with others who can give us accurate information about whether we're similar or not. So basically what that's saying is the things we do social comparison with are the things that are important to us. So like for instance, if I compared myself to some professional volleyball player, it wouldn't make me feel bad about myself because I don't play volleyball. I don't care about it. If you're better at it than me, then big deal. And that's important to know too, because when you're raising kids, nowadays we kind of want our kids to do everything, which is fine, but what you should be doing is you should be seeing what of those things they're good at and then dropping off the things that don't matter to them. So if your kid absolutely loves soccer, then why are you having them in dance and learning to play the maracas or whatever when what their passion in life is soccer? So you should drop the things that the kid doesn't like, that they hate, or that they don't care about, and help them to focus on what their real passions are in life, instead of just doing everything and driving yourself and them crazy. And that's what builds self-esteem, is being good at the things that you value in life. So figure out what your children value, or for yourself, figure out what you value, and then excel in that area. Who cares about the rest of it? Like for instance, my sister, she's by the time she got out of school, she was doing really well. But she struggled for so many years. She just was not a good reader or writer. She has dyslexia, and it was just so hard for her. And she always felt really stupid because I'm really good at academic stuff. I'm a great reader. I could read hundreds of pages and write. When I was in my doctoral program, we had to write a 60-page paper as an exam. And I cranked that out in just like a week. And so she felt like she was inferior because she couldn't do that kind of stuff. But I looked at her and I'm like, you're an artist. You make all of these amazing creations. How could you think that you aren't a smart, capable, talented person when you can do all of these amazing things? And so it took her a while to figure out that she shouldn't be comparing herself to the things that aren't her talent, that aren't important to her. She should be looking at her artistic skills as what's important. That's what's valuable. For me, it's something else. I have zero artistic skills. But for her, that's her forte in life. That's what she's born to do, is art. So you should be comparing yourself to what's important to you, not to all the rest of the stuff, because nobody is good at everything. Einstein wasn't good at everything. All right, self-disclosure. So some people like to self-disclose, some people don't like to self-disclose. Your personality plays a big role in that. Gender, culture, all of these will play a role in it. So, do you share intimate information about yourself? Women are much more likely to be self-disclosures. They're more likely to talk about intimate things. One reason is because that's what other women do, and so they've been trained to do that. Perhaps there's also some biological aspect to that. Men are more likely to talk about impersonal things like sports or politics, which can keep them from building intimate relationships, so that it can be problematic. But again, that is a huge generality, because for instance, if you are a man raised with 7 sisters, then you are going to be trained to be a good self-disclosure. You're going to be trained to be good at dealing with emotions. Whereas if you were born with all these brothers, then you're going to struggle with those more feminine characteristics, because you didn't have training in it. So perhaps there's a biological basis to it, but we definitely know that this is a hugely social type of thing. You can be trained to share intimacy. Now, women, like men, can be bad with non-disclosure. Women can be bad with too much self-disclosure. And so you have to be careful not to spew all this information, especially on a first date, because then you just look desperate or crazy. You have to pace yourself. And really, in a relationship, you should be looking at how much is the other person self-disclosing. And if I'm doing more self-disclosure than them, then I should really pull back. Perhaps that has to do with communal orientation. Because again, I'd say I was low on communal orientation. I believe you should get out of something what you put into it. And women do tend to be higher in communal orientation. So that could be why it is. But if you're disclosing more than the other person, you're putting yourself at risk of being betrayed, being mocked, being overly vulnerable, and having that trust broken. And I don't think you should not disclose in order to protect yourself, which some people do. They wall themselves off, and that's bad. But you should still be smart about it, right? Because you can share some information that really shouldn't be shared. So personality-wise, extroverted people with higher self-esteem and perhaps some exhibitionist traits are more likely to disclose, and also disclose a lot of different types of information about themselves. So the reason is, if I feel good about myself, then I don't feel threatened by sharing it. It doesn't make me feel vulnerable. So I can share a lot of stuff, because if you don't like it, then I don't really care, because I feel good about myself. Okay, so people with high self-esteem are much more likely to disclose. People with extroversion are much more likely to disclose. Also, culture plays a part. So people from East Asian collectivistic cultures are less likely to self-disclose than, say, Americans. Americans are very high on self-disclosure. We will talk to anybody about anything, and foreigners are often very amazed at how friendly Americans are. And they just came and talked to me about everything, and they were interested. And there's a theory where we say that some cultures are coconut cultures and some cultures are peach cultures. So some cultures, it's very easy to get into a relationship with people because they're soft on the inside. But just because they're your friend doesn't necessarily mean they're your intimate. They're not going to tell you everything. They're not going to necessarily trust you just because they're friendly with you. We can have a friendship, but that doesn't mean like I feel like I can depend on you. That's going to take some time. And so that's an American culture. We're a peach culture. Coconut cultures, on the other hand, they're hard on the outside, so it's very hard to create relationships. But once you do, now you're in the inner circle. Now it's, there's great amounts of intimacy. So Americans like to give kind of a superficial intimacy. We're just friendly to everybody. But we still require trust building really to get to that point of intense friendship. And other cultures like Scandinavia, even though they're not a oh, my brain just stopped working. Individualistic, collective. They're not a collectivistic culture. They are individualistic. They have a lot of those collectivistic type of traits, and so we often see collectivistic cultures as more of a coconut type of culture. Just an interesting thing. All right, we talked about this stuff. Talked about that. All right, let's talk about male friendship versus female friendship. So women are more egalitarian in their friendships. We want to be on the same level, whereas men are much more hierarchical. And men are often criticized for this. I don't really know why. It's just different. It's not a bad thing. A lot of men think that women's egalitarian type of behavior is a bad thing. Why wouldn't there be a hierarchy? You know, boys are usually the ones that would play, back when kids played, would play like King of the Hill. And so they tried to fight their way to the top of the hill, and whoever could stay on the top of the hill was the winner. It's not really something that girls would play, or at least not in general. Obviously, there's exceptions, okay? But psychology is always generalities. So anyhow, men's relationships are more hierarchical. There's more status seeking, and so they're always looking to see who's the top dog and who's the bottom dog in a relationship. And other men are fine with that. It's just part of male friendship. One problem it does create for men is it often decreases the amount of intimacy and nurturing and so on in the relationships, which is why male-female relationships are very healthy for men. Men who get married will live longer, they'll make more money, they'll have more sex. There's all sorts of benefits for men getting married. So even though Hollywood makes marriage sound terrible for men, you're actually much more, significantly more happy married than as a single person. So don't believe Hollywood, because Hollywood's stupid. Women, on the other hand, their happiness tends to stay the same or maybe decrease a little bit with marriage. But men, their happiness goes way up. Now obviously there's bad relationships, but generally speaking, men are much more happy married, because they get that nurturing and the emotional expression and the intimacy and the support and everything that they sometimes don't get in male friendships. Now again, an exception to this is if a man grew up with a lot of women, he may have been trained to have a more egalitarian, emotional sort of relationship with the people around them. Now testosterone is also a part of this. Testosterone has been linked to competitive behavior, so men don't feel as bad if they outperform their friends. It's just part of the relationship. Whereas women do tend to feel very bad if a hierarchy is created. So if you win at something, or if you do something that puts the other woman down, then we want to fix that. And so for us, women will often say things like, thank you, or I'm sorry, and in order to bring the relationship back to an equal level. And that's fine when it's another woman. Because what's happening is you have done something to hurt another woman, so you've pushed her down and created a hierarchy. And when you apologize, or when you say, oh, thank you so much, what you're doing is you're equaling out. You're saying, I'm responsible. I did something wrong too, and you equal out the relationship. But if you are doing that with a man, what happens is you say, I'm sorry, or you say thank you for something, and it creates the hierarchy. And then he doesn't say, oh, no, I'm sorry too. Or no, thank you so much. What you did was wonderful. Women often give men these opportunities to create an egalitarian status, and men just see that as an opportunity to create hierarchy. And so women need to realize that in a male-dominated workplace or relationship with a male friend or a boyfriend or husband or whatever, that you have to be careful about offering those opportunities to create a level playing field, because it can often be perceived as simply you're lowering yourself on the totem pole. And especially in a place of business, that can be really negative for you. So stop apologizing for everything. Stop profusely thanking people, because men don't see it the same way another woman would see it. And for you men, just try to remember that when a woman says, oh, I'm sorry, or thank you, or whatever, that she's not saying that she's lower on the totem pole than you. What she's saying is she's equal to you. So, anyhow. All right. So, we've kind of talked about all this. Let me see if we've... anything we haven't talked about? Well, let's talk about social media. Okay, so social media and friendship, social media and affiliation. It's been wonderful and it's been a curse. So and we all know this, there's pros and cons to it. So some of the good things is it's easier to stay in touch with distant friends. Like I've done a lot of traveling, so I have friends in Europe, and I've got friends in like Australia, Russia, Siberia, places all over the place. And I would never have kept in touch with them if it wasn't for Facebook. And so it's wonderful that way. You can stay in touch with your family and friends and see what's happening and see their pictures. But at the same time, you actually interact with them less. Like you might like their picture, but you don't have a conversation with them. So before Facebook, when I would try to keep in touch with these international friends, I would call them on the phone and we'd talk for an hour. And I can't remember the last time I called them on the phone and talked to them. I guess I'll have to do that. But because you see them all the time on Facebook, you just don't feel like you need to have that personal interaction. And then you actually end up being lonely because of it. So you're not getting that contact. And another thing that social media can do that we all are aware of is cause social comparison. Because we tend to post the things that are good in our life. And even if we're posting negative things, most of us don't post the full extent of how negative it is. Like for instance, I have a farm and I have a Facebook page for my farm, and on a farm animals die. It happens. Like yesterday I had a baby goat born, and unfortunately before it could get up and move and take care of itself, a raven found it, and I don't have a baby goat anymore, and that's really sad. But that's a big part of farming. A lot of animals die on a farm. And if I posted every single time one of these animals died, I don't know if anybody would be on my Facebook page anymore because it's just so negative. And so I might occasionally talk about these bad things that happen, but I don't talk about the extent of how bad it could be, or how exhausted you are at the end of the day, or whatever, So you minimize the negatives, and so then it just makes it look like people say all the time, oh, you're so lucky that you live on a farm. And I am lucky, but it's not easy. It's not like this dream that some people think it is, like everything's just wonderful and there's unicorns and butterflies and glitter. It's a hard life. And but when we look at social media, we don't see how hard people's lives are, and so it can make us feel like we're losers and can really hurt our self-esteem. Okay, so research has shown that the more time you spend on social media, the more depressed you are and the more lonely you are, the less friendships you have, the less you interact with family and friends. So basically, there's nothing inherently wrong with social media, but it for sure has negative aspects to it. It's not a substitute for face-to-face interactions. Alright, so that is it. If you have any questions, let me know, and if not, I will see you in the next chapter.